Hey guys, this is Alan, aka Gamelark, and I'm here again with Psycho Trip for another podcast. This time we're talking about bad trends in gaming.
Also known as the Ubisoft episode.
Yes. Expect a lot of railing on Ubisoft because they deserve it. So
Yeah.
let's get started with not Ubisoft. We both grew up around the time. Well, I started playing games, let's say, with the 3D like generation, which was N64 and PlayStation. And some of the bad trends I remember from back then were the fact that there were a ton of platformers and that people had like what was called collectathon fatigue, where it was basically the fact that almost every game was just collect this amount of whatever and then you get something else and then it unlocks later stages. So,
Yeah. I
um,
remember I was just gonna say that I find it very funny and kind of ironic that everybody is trying to get back to those classic platformers like 2D in regards to Mighty Number 9. That was a disaster, but and 3D in terms of like ukulele, which hopefully that's good. It looks good, but it is funny and it's interesting how every single game for a while up until maybe like the mid 2000s, every single game by default was a platformer
mhm.
and a platformer with heavy collectathon mechanics. And it's interesting just how quickly we moved away from that until the point where there are basically no more platformers on the market almost. But we'll get to what came next later. But I think it's kind of funny and interesting how quickly that shift happened, how egregious the platformers became, but also how much we want to get back to the best days of that.
Yeah. Well, as far as ukulele goes, I think a lot of people are excited for that because it was a team that was behind Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie,
Yeah.
and that was one of those games that did it right. And I think when it comes to collectathons, a lot of people accuse Donkey Kong 64 of having a lot of collectathon mechanics. It was kind of like Super Mario 64 set that gold standard, the template. And the reason that I think, like, okay, like with any other art form, a game comes out or something comes out and people try and emulate it, but they don't always get it right.
Yeah.
As what they didn't really copy over was the fun worlds and the fun mechanics. Super Mario 64 was a game that was not about collecting as much as it was about exploring. And you had those mechanics
Right.
built in. I mean, I what was it, the Rainbow Cruise stage or whatever that was? I can't remember off the top of my head. But that stage was nuts. And the way that you traversed it, all the back and forth jumping, the fact that there was no platforms and you just fall to your death. It was a lot of like the mechanics itself were solid. So
Yeah.
that the collectathons were just a reason, like where these items were just a reason for you to try and get there. And getting there
Exactly.
was the
See,
fun part. Now, if you have a collect
collectathons. I was just gonna say, collectathons are a means, not an end, and I feel like that's what a lot of games got wrong. You got it.
Yes.
You got it so on the nose there that the purpose of collectibles is to facilitate and encourage and reward exploration.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody gives a damn about the collectibles themselves, and you're not supposed to. If you care about the collectible, that's because of what's around it. Like you care about the stars because, okay, I got here by exploring and doing all this cool stuff to get here. Oh, and now I get to go to a new stage because I have enough stars. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not the collectibles themselves that we're into, it's what the collectibles cause, what it facilitates, and what it encourages. And that's something that I feel like we got away from towards the end of the platforming cycle, and what I hope we come back to.
Yeah. Like yeah, exactly. And like you said, the collectible itself, the only good thing about that was the sense of reward of satisfaction of getting there. You know what I mean? Especially
Right.
as you go further in the game and it gets harder and harder to collect said collectibles. But yeah, and the reason that games like Super Mario 64 and Banjo Kazooie and Banjo Tooie and Donkey Kong 64 to a slightly lesser degree are so well regarded and remembered is that the worlds themselves were interesting, and then of course the excuse for exploring them is to get these things. Now, I don't know if I should do this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyways. We're
Do it.
jumping ahead to today. I feel like No Man's Sky is a game that does that, but without any of the collectibles. Like you're just exploring to explore. And I We should save this for later. I was so excited for this game. I'm curious to see if you played it, what you think. But that was my impression. Now that we're talking about collectibles, like the collectibles are the reason to explore. You go there, you collect it, you move on.
I'll
Did
just
not feel
say
that
this
way
real
about that.
quickly. Um, I can't comment on the quality of that game for one reason. I liked Spore.
Okay, so you
That will tell you
yep.
enough about what my biases are and what I'm capable of liking and what I'm capable of forgiving if you give me a giant, nearly infinite world for me to explore. I'm willing to forgive a lot
Okay.
a- as long as you give me that world and I can make up my own adventures as I go through it. So no, I haven't played it yet, but I definitely still will, probably after a discount, and I'll
I would
probably
recommend
feel
that.
the same way about it as I felt about Spore,
Fair enough.
which was this game is objectively not good, but subjectively I love it.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do want to throw that out there. There have been just maybe we're doing a quick aside, but there have been games that I played that were dog shit, aka Superman 64. I actually kind of liked that game, even though it was a technical mess. Just follow me, okay? Because I
Okay.
liked being Superman, and I was like, oh, cool, I could shoot lasers. Now, was I annoyed by the fact that I could fly through the level on almost every level? Yes. But I just thought that I wasn't very good at the game. Like, I didn't realize this game is a broken mess. And the draw distances are like 5 feet. So, my point is, if you enjoy a particular game, bad game or bad gaming trends or designs or whatever, if you get your $60 worth, you get whatever money you put into it and you enjoy it, congrats. Like, that is the goal of, that is the whole
Yeah.
point of spending money on a game is to enjoy it. And that's why only reason reviewers are important or there or doing what they're doing is that you can kind of gauge, will I like this game before you plunk down said money to buy it? Because unfortunately, demos are kind of thing of the past. That's a quick aside. I just wanted to throw it in there. But
Yeah,
moving forward, that's just
I
something
agree.
good to say that even though all these are bad gaming designs, there have been games that I've enjoyed that have had some of these trends and designs, and I still like them regardless.
Yeah. When
So
we criticize games, we're not trying to criticize you, is
right.
what we're saying. Because, like I said, I like Spore. Spore is a shit game. I like it. I can still understand. I mean, also, if we're going to take this to a more modern, slightly different example, I like the first Man of Steel movie. It's a shit movie, but I enjoyed it. So, like, you can enjoy something that, everybody else says is bad, but there might be something in it that worked for you, and nobody else can take that away from you. Our only job is for you to hopefully understand what our biases are
hmm
so that you can understand what our opinions are and come to your own opinions.
Exactly. So I guess moving forward from the platformer generation, like you said, it took a while for it to change, and then of course I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like the next major push was shooters. Shooters like were all the rage. Um, Even around the Halo, basically from Halo forward, that was when it really started picking up steam, picking up traction, and we've had Call of Duty Infinity, just infinite amount of Call of Duties. Not that there's anything
It's
wrong
now
with them.
literally Infinite Warfare.
I know, I know. But see, with shooters, I guess I'm trying to think of like specific bad design for shooters. I think.
I know one.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead while I think of a good one.
Linear design.
Yep.
Now, see, because I'm very weird when it comes to shooters. So, most games, and anybody who's been following me for a while will know this. Most games, I want something that, above all else, is immersive, atmospheric. When it comes to first-person shooters, that's all good for me. But I really, the shooters that I like are the ones that don't try to be realistic,
hmm
are the ones that are very, I guess, gamey and arcadey. Like, for example, one of my favorite shooters is Team Fortress 2.
Okay.
And that game is, it's the gamiest game ever, but it's very fun. The mechanics are fun, and it's an enjoyable competitive experience. I mean, I still haven't played Overwatch, but I've heard a lot of people say that Overwatch is kind of a similar experience, so I'm sure I'd like it a lot.
Yeah.
But that's what I look for. Or like for Doom, for example, that's not a realistic experience at all, but it's very
hmm
arcadey. The mechanics are clear, and you know what you're doing, and it's very competitive. So those are the kinds of shooters that I like. Um, if you're trying to do something different, it's going to take a lot more for you to sell me on that. So one of the major problems that I have with first-person shooters is first off, they don't give a shit about the single player campaign. I mean, if you're going to
That's
have one, you
true.
should give some kind of shit about it. But
Battlefield
in
is
the
really
single, yeah, in the single player campaign, it's laughable in how linear it is. Like, it's literally just people have even coined the term corridor shooters
yeah.
because that's what they're like.
I
Like, if you
call
were
it
to compare,
I call it whack-a-mole gaming, if I can throw that in there. Whack-a-mole
yes,
meaning like bad guys just pop up, you shoot them, and then they pop back down.
how is that fun? Like, actually, though, how is that fun? Like, if you're not going to give me a good story, or even if you do give me a good story, if the gameplay, if you have gameplay in your game, that's if it's not just like a point and click adventure, and that's fine too. I love those games. If you're gonna have some sort of very interactive gameplay in a game, then it had better be fun. I don't care what else you do. I don't care how good the multiplayer is. I don't care how good anything else is. You chose to put a single player campaign in this game, and it's shit.
right.
And because it's there, I have a right to call it shit. So I feel like that's a serious problem, especially because you don't have to do that. Look at one of my favorite shooters ever. One of my favorite more traditional shooters is Fear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the single player campaign to Fear is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is, I mean, the story is, typical horror, whatever, but it's still terrifying. But in terms of just the gameplay, it has some of the most satisfying gameplay I've ever played in any kind of shooter. And it's it's a linear game. Like, it's not an open world or anything, but it's not, you're not just going from corridor to corridor waiting for enemies to pop out of cover. For one
Mm-hmm.
thing, AI is very advanced. People still look at Fear's AI as a pinnacle of AI. They strategize, they try to flank you. The level design is very open and is very conscious of what's going on. That's another problem a lot of first person shooter campaigns have. The level design is very slapdash and lackluster.
Mm-hmm.
Fear understood what the shape of a level would do to how the AI would react, how you would have to strategize, who has the high ground, who has the low ground, what entrances and exits there are. There's a lot going on there. And I feel like that's something that has been missing from a lot of first person shooters. So that's definitely one thing that I think was when first person shooters were at their height. I think that was definitely a major problem. Another one, I'm just going to mention it briefly, then go on to you,
Mm-hmm.
were a lot of the mechanics that were good at the time, but everybody tried to copy, like, regenerating health, or,
Yeah.
the way you aim down sights, or, stuff like that. Kind of, we got too into that for a while, and it kind of ruined everything. Or the two weapon loadout, stuff like that. But I'll let you go on from there.
I've got quite a bit to say. I'm trying to think of like the best way to say it and the quickest way to say it. I'm going to counterpoint your linear level design by saying that I think in some cases it works well. I've played Call of Duty Modern Warfare, like the Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the first one and the second one. I enjoyed both of those campaigns, and they're seen as more linear games. And if you play them on higher difficulties, they are pretty challenging, right? But I don't know if it's the linearity as much as there was a lot of variety in those, that at least Modern Warfare. Like, you had a sniping mission, you had a bunch of
Right.
other missions that were just memorable. They were called set
That's a
pieces
good
for a
example.
reason,
Yeah.
where it was linear, but it was linear and it was challenging, and it was in some ways just exciting to you felt like you were in a war epic or something like that. Now, I have hopes, dreams, whatever, and I'm sure there's probably a game out there like this. I wish that there were more games like Star Fox 64, where you had branching mission paths, where you complete it, but
Yes.
if you complete it in a certain way, you go to a different level than you would if you complete it a different way. I envision a shooter someday where you have maybe 10 to 12 missions, not a very long game. But in order to get the best path, to get the best outcome, you have to do extremely well on every mission. And there is no way you could know how to do extremely well the first time around. So it's a game that would basically force you to play it again and again until you were good enough to get the best ending, the best levels, basically. But
Right.
that's just we should do an episode on ideal games or games that we'd love to see someday. Maybe save that, table that for later.
We totally
I
should.
I want to talk about two games that are really really prevalent in shooter games, Call of Duty and Halo. Now, Call of Duty really, I think, hit its stride and it blew up with Modern Warfare. Why? Well, the mechanics were solid, right? It was a fun game to play. First of all, for shooters, your mechanics have to be solid. It can't feel sloppy. It has got to feel tight. And there were enough
Definitely.
loadouts and options and choices that you could have very different experiences. I had a friend when I was playing Modern Warfare 2. I played with 5 other guys. It was one of my favorite times doing multiplayer games, playing multiplayer games. And we had a full team, and we would play almost every night. This was in college, of course. And I was much more of like the lone wolf that would just flank people. I had a Kimbo, what were those? AA-12 shotguns with extended mags. I was that shithead that would just run around and just shoot people, right? And I wouldn't have a very good kill to death ratio, but I was an integral part of the team because my other friend he was much more likely to post up somewhere, hold a choke point. He wasn't camping, but he would hold a position and just wreck. So the enemy team, like they were anticipating that I was coming, right? So they would try and move, and when they tried to move, my other friend would find them. And my other friend was the worst shithead. He would camp and he would use a SCART beat. You remember that? I don't know if you played that game, but it was a gun that had a heartbeat monitor. So he would just super camp, and then whenever they were running away from me, they would run into him or his brother. So my point is that it allowed a lot of flexibility as far as the way you played the game. Like the core mechanics were fun, it felt good to play, and then you could play it in a lot of different ways. Now, where they started to go wrong, in my opinion, was they did not change it up enough. They really didn't. From year to year, all I see with new Call of Duty games, the biggest change I've seen was it Infinite? I can't even remember what it was now. It's either Infinite Warfare or it's not Infinite Warfare. That hasn't come out yet. The one that had the wall running mechanic. I think that was Black Ops 3, and that was fun.
No, it was Advanced Warfare, I think.
Was it? Okay. Obviously you can tell I can't remember at this point.
But see, here's the thing, because I totally agree with you. But when Call of Duty does change the formula, then people complain. It's one of those things where it's like it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Right, I would definitely agree with you. I agree with you that they should do that. But I'm just saying that that's kind of why they don't do that more often.
You might be right, but also I feel like if we're talking about bad gaming trends, the trend is that they basically just keep saying, well, look, you can play it this way. We've added a drone, or we've added an RC car that blows up. It's these minor cosmetic changes that honestly could be done as DLC patches. It's basically become Madden at this point, where you're changing a roster. Like, you're changing out, like, the swap outs, and now your kill streaks carry over, or you use XP to get kill streaks instead of kills, or whatever it is. It's all minor cosmetic changes.
I guess the question is, and I totally agree with you here. Like, actually, I agree with you.
There's
100%.
no incentive for them.
I'm trying to be devil's advocate.
Please
here,
go ahead.
But I guess the question is, how much can a game change and still be the same game? Like, that's something that I hear from a lot of other YouTubers about Call of Duty. That with Advanced Warfare and Infinite Warfare, Call of Duty is so far removed now from what it originally was. Like, what even defines a Call of Duty game? Should there even be more Call of Duty games if it's so different? If we are sick of the formula that Call of Duty presented, if you're going to do something different, should it even still be called Call of Duty anymore?
The answer is no. It's called Titanfall. That's the game that was the Call of Duty successor, because it added to me, Titanfall felt like Call of Duty plus a whole new mechanic. That's why it was fun. Now, unfortunately, the community died out pretty quickly, and I think that's partly because there's too many AI players. But that is where, like, they should have just either retired it, or they should have made a massive change and just dealt with the backlash, because at this point they're just bleeding off players slowly as people are seeing Battlefield 1 trailers. I don't know if you saw this, but the Call of Duty Infinite Warfare trailer had the most dislikes out of any Call of Duty trailer in history. It was pathetic because, like you said,
a trailer too. Like, what the fuck? But I think it's, again, because of how cynical we are as gamers. Like, what I saw, because I was actually covering E3 and stuff when everyone was talking about that game.
Right.
But I think a lot of it was because we were cynical. Because, for example, like when you saw him get into the ship and go into space, everyone was like, "Oh, that's definitely scripted. It's probably on rails. It's, you probably can't do that in the actual game." So we automatically assumed, and rightly so, because I mean, game developers have been doing that shit to us for years now.
Right.
Rightly assume that all of this was a hoax in some way, or as close to a hoax as you can get without it being illegal.
Sure.
So then, as we learn, no, it's not on rails. Yes, you can just jump into the ship and go in space. Then people started kind of, moving back toward it. But then you had other people who were saying, oh, now it's too different from Call of Duty. But my point is that when it comes to that trailer, I think it's because we've conditioned ourselves to not trust the change that has been presented to us. We've conditioned ourselves to automatically assume the developers are liars.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are half the time.
They are. And I think if you're asking me, aside from the fact that there's fatigue of having annual franchises, what made Modern Warfare 1 and 2, like what was the real problem for each game? One of the things that I think that they really overlook is map design. Everyone can remember their favorite map from Modern Warfare 1 or 2, but it gets a lot harder the further along you go. And for some reason, I just feel like map design is super critical when it comes to multiplayer games. And the thing is with Halo, right, with Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 1 and Warfare 2, they had choke points that were created, especially, I played a lot of Team Deathmatch. If you're doing Team Deathmatch, you have to create maps where there are choke points, because teams would go naturally to hold the said choke point and just dominate the other team. And of course, that creates an interesting dynamic where you have a lot less of people just running around the map and shooting whoever they see. There's real battles going on. Now, if you have something like Halo, the thing that I love about Halo 1 and 2 and 3, not so much about 4 and beyond, but 1, 2, and 3 understood the point of those maps was they brought everyone together because the weapons were at certain locations. So people were naturally going to go for weapons. There would naturally be fights for said weapons. And those weapons gave you an edge. And then it became a struggle to kill whoever had the sniper rifle. Or if someone had a shotgun, you knew, okay, I've got to keep my distance. Like, it creates an interesting dynamic because Halo had that formula. And then I think where they started to go wrong is when they tried to change it to loadouts like Call of Duty, and you're like, no, that's not what made Halo great. It made it great because all the items were on the maps, and you had to go get the items before you could use them. Everyone started out on a level playing field. You all had the shitty ass assault rifle, and back in Halo 1, I guess, did you start out with the pistol? I can't remember. I think you did. Point is, everyone starts out equal, and then they have to go for the better weapons. Whereas with Call of Duty, it especially when you have higher level players, there are definite times where you're just like, I remember in Modern Warfare 2, before they nerfed those 1887s, holy shit, people were sniping you out from 20 or 30 feet away when they were like veteran players. They had played for basically nonstop for like 2 weeks. It was just unbelievable. They were dominating. So you've got to create that balance among players, good and bad, veteran and younger.
Yeah, see, I feel like this goes to a larger problem, which I see in both first-person shooters and MMOs, which is homogenizing things and making things more boring to, I don't even know why, I guess the idea behind taking out those weapons and, maybe balancing them better, making sure everybody has them or has the ability to have them in their loadout or whatever. The idea is to put everybody on a level playing field. But like you said, that works against itself, because then you have people who find the superior loadouts or the best combination, and then they dominate everyone. But what it also does is it takes away a lot of the dynamism of
skill
battle. And I can speak to this much more for MMOs than I can for first-person shooters because I don't play enough of them. But what you were just describing reminded me of a similar issue that I see in a lot of MMOs. This taking away of the flavor, taking away the fun stuff, quote unquote, in favor of homogenizing things and making sure everybody can do the same thing in the same way. An attempt to make things on an even playing field, but in practice, all it does is encourage min-maxing so that some people dominate over others.
I think you're right. And as far as you were saying, where they leave like the kind of wacky, quirky stuff in there, I wonder if the noob tube combos from Modern Warfare 2, if that would survive today, or if they would nerf it. Because I remember back in the day, people were so mad. Tactical knifing did get nerfed. I used to do that all the time. I went 27-0 tactical knifing. It was kind of a way of breaking the game, especially when you had, I think it was the loot drop, like you could run really, really fast. But for me, it was a fun gameplay. It was a fun way to play the game because it was all about speed and reaction time. You'd run into a room and you had like less than a second to see if anyone's aiming at you and go after them and then go after the next person. And some people hated it, and it may have been broken, and I think they fixed it for that reason. But especially with like the noob tube combos in Modern Warfare 2. I can remember so many fun times being at airport and just shooting noob tubes across the hallway and getting random kills. It was fun. But like you said, as they worked harder to make sure that less experienced players had fun, it kind of dropped that skill gap, right? Whereas something like Battlefield, I unfortunately sometimes feel when I play that game, I'm so bad that I can't get ahead, right? Like I can't get better at the game because I'm constantly getting wrecked by some dude in a helicopter who's been there for the entire match. I think that there has to be a happy balance between skill and just like a good playing field. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Making sure
Yeah.
that people with less skill still have fun. And the game that does it the best, if I can finish real quick, Rocket League. You have fun playing that game no matter if you suck, and if you're really good at it, you will dominate. There's no gimmicks aside from maybe like the gimmicky courses. But what I'm saying is they have found a perfect balance.
Yeah, see, the problem is that sometimes though it works against itself. Like when you're talking about, trying to put players on an even playing field, oftentimes it works against itself. Like I know like in Battlefront, I didn't play much of that cuz I hated it, but in Battlefront there were certain guns that were just objectively better and broken, and you could only get them if you were a better player and had the experience and unlockables to get that loadout. I would much rather have the guns be on the field and you pick them up, and yeah, they're overpowered, but you earned it,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody is going to start coming at you to balance it out. Some things you just need to leave to the players.
Yeah.
They will balance things out on their own sometimes.
No, I completely
And
agree.
yeah, and it's the same thing with MMOs. They're especially in regards to, I don't know how many MMOs you play, but you know how there's the tank, the healer, and the DPS.
Yeah.
The DPS, I used to be like always DPS and everything. My main in WoW was an arcane mage, but I started realizing some inherent fundamental problems with the basic idea of DPS, and that's the fact that it all relies on nothing but pure math. That's what it comes down to. How much damage are you ultimately doing? And if you do that, you're going to incentivize homogenization because every single class needs to be able to do comparable DPS with one another. You
Right.
only need to output that same amount of numbers. By doing that, you're encouraging min-maxing, which works against lower players who don't know, the intricate math or exactly how to pull off your rotation and blah, 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 blah. And it makes each class too similar to one another, each DPS class too similar to one another and what they have to do. So I see that same issue in first-person shooters and the way they've homogenized things as I do in MMOs. I would rather have, in the case of MMOs again, and then we'll get back to what we're talking about, but in the case of MMOs, I would rather have each DPS class do what they do in a different way
Mm-hmm.
that is completely integral to the team, then have each of them just focus on the raw numbers of how much you can do. So let's say, I don't know, a warlock focuses mostly on AoE, and that's what they excel at, whereas a mage focuses more on single target damage, and that's what they excel at. Blah, 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 blah. I would much rather have it work like that than for us to worry about pure min-maxing and pure numbers. So bring it back to first-person shooters. I see a similar thing with them taking away the dynamicness or dynamism, if that's the word, from the game and throwing it into these weird RPG progression systems that work against themselves and just take away the flavor of the game, take away the dynamic nature of the battlefield, and in the end just make some players objectively better than others.
You're right. And you know what? Now that they're mentioning it, the only thing that really kind of offset that with Call of Duty was the fact that you reset every time you prestige. You had the choice to reset, and it was kind of like a system designed so that people were constantly kind of having to work their way back up to get those better weapons. Of course, you could just stay at one place, but I completely agree that like the homogenization is a real problem, and I think with first person shooters, maybe not necessarily with MMOs, there is this struggle to appeal to people that may or may not be good at shooters, right? It's like they're trying to just balance everything so that, there's not too much skill gap between like when you start out and some of the better players. Now, Battlefield just kind of doesn't give a shit. You'll just get wrecked. But Call of Duty, I think, seriously has that problem. But
I mean, have brackets. Have it so that, I mean, that's how it already works, right? Have brackets so that
ideally, but I
if you're
don't.
bad, if you're just starting out, you're with other people that are just starting out, and then
It
work your way up from
it
there.
does sometimes, but it doesn't always work in practice. Is what I'm trying to say. And you know what you were saying about RPG mechanics. I think that I mean, just look at the way that like it started out with having like a couple perks, a couple different guns, and a couple different grenades, and now there's like I don't know, like a dozen different things you can change on your loadout, all these minor little tweaks that you unlock more and more. And obviously, I mean, now I guess some players may or may not decide to prestige because they don't want to have to go through that whole hassle again. I don't know. But I think we kind of said enough about shooters. I don't know if we should create a separate podcast for this or not, but we promised we would do it on this one, so we're going to go straight into Ubisoft, straight out of Ubisoft.
Oh
I
god, we're so nerdy.
I I think Ubisoft.
Let it out, buddy.
It hurts. I just I'm so tired of their games sometimes. Like I love them. I love some of their games. I remember their Prince of Persia series being really cool. I think what's just happened is over time, I think there's this shift right around the time that Assassin's Creed 2 came out and the creative director pieced out because he was like, this company is going down the shitter. Like their priorities and objectives totally changed. And if you play, I mean, we will just perhaps look at strictly Assassin's Creed and maybe a little bit of like we'll pepper in Far Cry, we'll pepper in Watch Dogs and the Colossal whatever the hell that was. There's just certain aesthetics and designs that they use over and over and over. The first
Yeah.
one is every map is going to have at least a dozen or more vantage points, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Eagle, like the places for eagles in Assassin's Creed, I forget what they're called. Whatever, it doesn't matter. They're all the fucking same. You climb up to a height, radio towers in Far Cry, whatever they were in Watch Dogs. Even Far Cry Primal had stuff like that. I think it was like campfires or something like that. And it's just, I mean, I think it really came to a head with Far Cry Primal, where they literally copied the map from 4. But let me keep going. I feel like the problem with Ubisoft, the game, which people have coined that term before, I'm not the one to coin it, is that it is something that they constantly remind you you're playing a video game. Here's your map. Right. Here's all these different things that are populating the map. Here's all your different chests. Here's all your different side quests. Here's all your different people that you can go and tail. Like they've just made a checklist. That's what their games are. Their games are a very thinly constructed narrative, which it gets worse and worse for the Assassin's Creed series as you go on. Mm-hmm. And then all of these different checklists, which just makes it feel like a video game. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel organic.
Right. And you made a really great point, like a mind-blowing point in the first episode when you were talking about The Witcher 3 and how they do, in one of their expansions, they do almost the exact same thing Ubisoft does in a certain way, but for some reason it's more engaging. For some reason it's interesting. And I can't remember exactly what you pointed out.
The question marks. It was the question marks and not knowing what they were.
Yeah, there has to be a certain level of mystery. There has to be a certain level of there's more than just the stuff you're seeing on the map. Because, you know, there's some stuff in The Witcher 3 which doesn't pop up on the map, so you still have an incentive to explore. And I said something really smart in the first episode, but I'm too stupid to remember what it was, that kind of summed up what the difference is.
I think you were saying that it was organic versus feeling like it was mechanical and gamey.
That's it, yes. And see, because the reason why the Ubisoft formula didn't bother me at first was, I guess, the same reason why I liked Man of Steel, like to go back to that, was because I saw something and I'm like, okay, I see what they're doing here. They can improve this. They can keep going further with this. And I want to see where this goes. I thought there was more to it than what there was.
But there isn't.
But then as more came and it kept going on and on and on and on and on, and I stuck with it for a while. It was up until Watch Dogs. Mm-hmm. Watch Dogs was the last game I tolerated with the Ubisoft formula in it.
Yeah.
And after that, I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous because it takes away any sense of, and it's not that it's there. It's the way they do it. I really want to stress that because again, The Witcher has stuff like that in it too,
Right.
but they do it much better.
Execution.
And it's the mechanical nature of how Ubisoft is doing this.
Right.
That makes it so egregious and so terrible and so taking you out of the experience rather than putting you into the experience. Because I'll just say this and then I'll give you the floor. What is the actual reason that Ubisoft keeps doing this? It's not just because they're a bunch of evil businessmen. That's part of it. But I truly believe that when they brought out this formula, what they wanted to do was create a world where you always felt like you had something to do, where a world that felt like there was more to it than just the narrative. They were trying to create a big feeling world with a lot of stuff to do that would encourage dynamic, emergent gameplay. That was the goal. And that's something that I feel like The Witcher and its execution of it did right. Whereas the Ubisoft games, they've lost sight of their purpose in implementing this formula, and it's just become a mechanical checklist.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right. There's so many things I can say, and I'm going to try and do it as quickly as possible because everybody's time is precious, especially our listeners. I think one of the things that really annoys me is you have three main series, Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and now Watch Dogs, which are doing a sequel, that all have the same similar mechanics when it comes to map exploration. That's a problem. You should not have three completely different games with all the same exploration. And Far Cry 3, it really didn't bother me so much, but it was really a problem with 4, where, like you said, when I'm playing a game, I understand that I can buy into the fact that there are certain gamey mechanics, and I'm fine with it, okay? But when I looked at, okay, I got to stick with my point, and then I'll get to the Division. With Far Cry 4, one of the biggest problems I had, and I mentioned this, was the fact that there were like hundreds of chests. That takes out the excitement of exploring and finding one on my own if I can see where these fucking chests are. Like, I had to say, I had a similar problem with Witcher 3 with the Skellige Isles. Anyone that's played the game knows that. And everybody kind of like jokes about it. Even the developers have admitted they put too many chests in Skellige. But that's a one tiny little part of that game. Whereas with Ubisoft, it's thing after thing after thing, okay? The other thing is that I really don't like about some of their games, and this is, again, personal bias. I've never played The Division, but I remember watching gameplay footage, and I just can't stand their HUD. Their HUD is out of control. There's shit popping up all the time.
Yeah.
Every second of the game, some shit is popping up on screen, popping up on screen. You've got like four different the field of view. You can only see about 80% of what's going on because you've got status bars and communications and little text blurbs popping up that just are constantly pulling me out of this game, right? That's just one other thing. I really got to be concise about this because I can keep going. You can tell that I'm agitated because I'm just letting all this...
Keep going, man.
It's cathartic, okay? But finally, to get to your point, why does Witcher 3 work and Assassin's Creed with all their side quests and nonsense not work? We've talked about it, okay? One, with the question marks, you don't know what it's going to be, whether it's a side quest or monster nest or whatever. Two, the side quests are actually fun. How the fuck do we still have tailing missions? I don't know if the newest Assassin's Creed had it, but 4 did. 4, which is 6 games in. How do we still have tailing missions? Nobody likes the tailing missions. They never evolve. They just keep those checklists and they maybe remove 1 or 2 things, but then they just add new checklists to the games. Now, 4 was a great game, and I think it's because it was a pirate game that they forced to be an Assassin's Creed game. All the Assassin's Creed parts were not that fun. All the pirate parts were fantastic. So if they had just dropped the Assassin's part from that game, it would have been perfect. However, that is my point. Is that they don't realize games are not fun because we have to do checklist after checklist. You have to make sure that these things that you're doing are fun. And I'll give you an example of 4 where they took something that could be extremely... It is just a collectathon checklist. The sea shanties. All you do is run around and collect them. They're all over the world, but why were they fun? Why were they rewarding? Because you unlock songs with them. And when you're sailing around on the ocean, you try and listen to a new sea shanty. You're like, oh, cool, I'm going to check this out. And it's something that immersed you in the game world because it's a lot of times based off real life sea shanties. So,
and it connects back to the actual world. It's not like, oh, you got another 200
gold.
Whatever. You got another 200 gold, or you got another something that's clearly just a game mechanic and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
You got something that's not just feeding into the game, that's feeding into the world.
Yes.
And
So
that's a reward in and of itself.
and I think that that's something that they just, I don't, I think they need to remember that video games are supposed to be fun. They need to remember that again. I can tell you, I only played maybe 2 hours of Watchdog because it wasn't fun. I tried escaping from the police and it was a nightmare. And the driving mechanics were terrible. Like I hated the driving mechanics. Even GTA 4, I had a little bit of trouble with it, but it was I could get past the driving mechanics in that game. Whereas with Watch Dogs from the get go, I was like, oh, this is going to be Assassin's Creed modern day with shitty driving mechanics. I'm out, and I just stopped playing it. And so with Ubisoft, unfortunately, like the last straw for me really was Far Cry Primal because I'm big mythology buff, and I thought having a prehistoric setting would be really cool and it's something different.
Right?
But then it all just boiled down to the same mechanics. I played that game for about 4 hours and traded it in because I could see the same patterns emerging already. I've got to go protect this group from whatever. I don't care. It's not fun.
Here's the real problem with Far Cry Primal, and it's a very basic problem, which really just proves your point about how they're just copy pasting these games. And it's not that the map is the same as the one in Far Cry 4. That is a problem.
Mhm.
I would have liked it better if it was an Easter egg, like if it was clearly meant to be like that. But in the beginning of the game, they say it takes place in Central Europe, which is nowhere near where Far Cry 4 takes place, but that's aside the point. The main thing that proves your point about how these are all copy-pasted games, and it goes so deep into the mechanics, is that they made Far Cry Primal a game that doesn't have guns. A game that there's no guns, there's no firearms, which obviously makes sense. But what didn't they do? They didn't improve the fucking melee combat. At all. You have a game, they literally just took Far Cry and took away the guns. And at first I was like, I'm totally into this because I like Far Cry because of how it's never been totally centered in reality. I've always liked to see the weird, crazy places that series goes. So I'm like, okay, a prehistoric Far Cry. I'm so into that. And I'm going to have all these crazy prehistoric stone and bone weapons and shit. I'll throw some bees at people. That shit's badass. But it didn't improve the melee combat. They just threw the exact, and it was fine in Far Cry 3 and 4 when that's not the center of the game, where you're just using melee mostly for stealth kills or insta kills or, when you run out of ammo. But in a game that's centered on that, or that's the main thing you're doing, they don't do anything to improve it.
Nope.
That shows you right there, everything that you are saying is completely true. They're just copy pasting this shit without any regard for what it means or what it can do in the world or what they should have done to add to the world, rather than just taking stuff away or switching some things around and repackaging it as a $60 fucking game.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna drop this metaphor and maybe we can end it with this. Ubisoft games are basically like, instead of creating a new puzzle for every game, they just use the same puzzle and change out different pieces. That's it. So it's like, oh, Far Cry, but with a different setting. Do we change the other mechanics? Not really. It's like the same puzzle, but with slightly different pieces every time. Yeah. So the problem is, as you keep changing these pieces, it doesn't fit with the rest of the game, and you're just like, wait, I've seen this. Like, why is this mechanic in this game? It doesn't really fit. That's all I'm going to say.
I'll leave it at this. Here's a good litmus test for if you need to make a new game. Then Ubisoft, if you're listening, which obviously you are, because this is a great podcast, so I'm going to give you some advice. Next time you want to make a new game, consider this. What can I add to this experience? If you can't answer that question, then don't make a fucking game until you can.
Yep.
That's the problem with annualization of video games. It makes no sense because a new game should only be made if you can add something to the experience. Now, that can be something very simple. Like sometimes a setting change is enough to make a new game. Like if it's a game that's very atmospheric and really focuses on the lore and the mythology and all of that stuff, and the mechanics you have are very solid and, they haven't been overdone yet, then yeah, sure. Throw in a new environment and make the mechanics almost the same, and that's fine. But you need to be adding something. something that justifies another $60 purchase, something that doesn't make me say, okay, but I could have just done that in the game you already gave me. So next time you want to make a new game, ask yourself, what can I add to this experience? If you can't answer it, wait until you can, then make a game.
And I think, at least with Ubisoft, and I know I'm going to be just making an assumption here, but it's a difference between I won't ever say any game is 100% art. All games are products in one form or another. However, when it's so blatantly obvious, like, I'm sorry, Madden fans, but Madden is a product. That's why they make a game every year. I think even Madden fans will admit that Madden is a product and that they aren't really worried about trying to improve it or change it or any of those things. I mean, you take something like Uncharted 1, 2, and 3, and then finally 4, versus something like Assassin's Creed. Each game offered something slightly different, or at least the story. Even with 4 was essentially a setting change like you just talked about. The mechanics were slightly tweaked, but the story was awesome. The setting was awesome. And they waited a decent amount of time and put a lot of time and effort into making it something unique, something different from the other games. And I think that the issue is there is no incentive at this point for Ubisoft, for Activision, to stop the annualization of their franchises. The only way, and here we go, I'm gonna get my neck beard on and start rallying us as gamers. The only way for shit to change is for us to stop spending money.
If and that's what happened with Assassin's Creed, though.
Yeah, and that's Call of Duty, their sales have been dropping too, year by year.
We have a voice. We have the ability to vote with our wallets, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I know again, if you enjoy these games and you enjoy these franchises, go ahead and support it. But if you're like me and you're tired of spending $60 for a game that comes out and you just kind of feel somewhat indifferent to, you're just looking for something to play. If you're playing a game because you're just looking for something to play, read a book, do something different. Games should be a passion. They should be something we're excited to play, something we enjoy doing. It shouldn't just be a waste of time or a mind sink, in my opinion. It should be something that engages us. So that's what I say.
And to your point about Ubisoft and games as a product or something, I mean, I don't think there's, like you said, like all art is in some ways a product, whether It's just a product to get attention or bring attention to you as an artist or monetary reward. There's nothing wrong with that. And when I look at Ubisoft, the reason why I get so mad is because there's still a lot of brilliance and a lot of talent at Ubisoft. Yes, these are the people who made the Rayman games, for example. These people are capable of... These are people who created the Assassin's Creed series. They ran into the ground, but they created this. These are the people who made Prince of Persia. Or at least, I don't know if they made it, but they made the popular games of it that we know today. So, it comes to Ubisoft as opposed to EA, which I think that they come out with some good games more consistently, but it's mostly through other people, and they're also a terrible company.
Yes.
So I have much less sympathy towards them. I get a lot more emotional over Ubisoft because I know there are people in that company that are actually passionate about making games and are really trying to make some good games, but they keep making these dumb decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they can do better. Like, honestly, I'm gonna talk like a parent talking to, or a teacher talking to a student. I think you can do better, Ubisoft.
Yeah,
I've seen you do better.
You're absolutely right. I feel the same way. I feel like there are glimpses of greatness when I'm playing Assassin's Creed games. I already mentioned the fact that 4 would have been better as a standalone game. It's not that, and their artwork, their design, the amount of people that they hire, like the amount of detail that they put into some of these games is just mind-boggling. But at the end of the day, the mechanics are just stale in many cases. But I don't want to keep going on that. I know this was kind of a serious podcast for me. I feel tired after this. I'm just like, people are going to think Alan, aka Game Lark, is such an angry man. But it's just, I'm just annoyed because I'm tired. I've stopped shelling out money. And I really just, the only way for things to change is for us to voice our opinions. As dumb as that sounds. Two guys talking about this on the internet may not mean much, but sales do count. And for companies that listen, hopefully, even with like I said, Witcher 3, they joked about the skeleton chest because players complained about it. That's just, I'm using Witcher 3 again, but the point is, it does matter. If there's a lot of backlash, look at Dragon Age 2 versus Inquisition. Like they listened to the backlash from Dragon Age 2, the fact that fans were really upset with the linear dungeons. I'm not saying Inquisition's a perfect game, but I think they did not make that same mistake. And they were even published by the game was published by EA. So there is hope. We just have to, like I said, if you're tired of putting up with something, at the very least, even maybe wait until games are discounted. Not every game is worth buying as soon as it comes out. So there you go. That's my thoughts. You want any other closing thoughts?
Oh man, we hit it out of the park with this one. I think we're good.
All right. Game developers, if you're listening,
which of course you are.
Yes, of course you are. Why are you making your game? That's a great question for anything in art, movies, music. Why are you doing what you're doing? If the answer is to make money, maybe that's not the best way. Maybe you shouldn't make it.
Even if your answer is to make money, like that can only sustain you for so long. If your only answer is to make money, then you can still make a good product. Like all businesses, at the end of the day, they want to make money. That's the number one goal.
Sure.
That's fine. They have to pay their employees. That's why they exist. But even if your goal is to make money, you can be passionate about it.
Well, other than making money, why is this thing existing?
Yeah, because of course your goal is always going to be to make money. But yeah, what other reason do you have? Do you have pride in your work? Because that can be an extension of, oh, I want to make money, but you can still have pride in your work because you know that if I keep making the same bullshit, eventually people aren't going to be giving me money for it, which is what happened with Assassin's Creed.
I completely agree. Well, this has been a very, very animated and awesome episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. I don't know what we'll be doing next, but in any case, thank you all for listening.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.